I'm BBC News Talking Business.
Hello there, welcome to Talking Business Weekly with me, Ty Genwright. Let's have a look at what's on the show. The crypto crunch is coming, with opinions divided. Just how important is the US presidential election for the future of cryptocurrency? The Democrats have spent years cracking down on rogue crypto firms, so will that continue with Kamala Harris, or can Donald Trump fulfill his promise to make America the crypto capital of the planet? I'm going to be discussing all of this with these two. The chief legal officer of one of the world's biggest crypto exchanges explains why it's crucial the world's biggest economy makes the crypto rules clearer. And we'll hear from the man overseeing them. The head of the US regulator, the Securities and Exchange Commission, explains why he's brought so many lawsuits against crypto firms. Plus, the viability of vaping. The boss of the e-cigarette firm Juul tells us why his business has a long-term future, even though he doesn't want any young people taking up the habit. Wherever you're joining me from around the world, hello and welcome to the show. The US election is looming large, and there are many issues on voters' minds, from inflation and climate change to war in the Middle East. But despite all those, one Republican senator has said that cryptocurrencies are a defining issue in the run-up to November the 5th, and he's not alone in thinking that. The place of one of the world's most divisive and consequential technologies in the world's biggest economy is at stake after a years-long crackdown on crypto by Joe Biden's administration. Well, since the US regulator, the Securities and Exchange Commission, brought its first enforcement action against crypto back in 2013, the number of cases has grown steadily, hitting new highs in recent years. To understand why they've been so keen to take action, here's President Biden's Treasury Secretary.
Innovation is also one of the hallmarks of a vibrant financial system and economy. But as we've painfully learned from history, innovation without adequate regulation can result in significant disruptions and harm to the financial system and to individuals.
That risk means some countries have banned crypto. 3 years ago, the world's second biggest economy, China, made all crypto transactions illegal. Meanwhile, the G20 group of leading economies is working on drawing up minimum standards for crypto laws around the world. The case of Sam Bankman-Fried and his now defunct FTX exchange highlights the risks. In March, the US jailed the founder of what was once one of the world's largest crypto exchanges for 25 years for fraud, after he stole billions of dollars from customers around the world. US authorities have also targeted the world's biggest crypto exchange, Binance. Its founder, CZ Zhao, got 4 months in prison, and the company paid a $4.3 billion fine after he admitted allowing criminals, child abusers and terrorists to launder money on his platform. But while those might be extreme cases, policymakers are split on the value of cryptocurrencies. Concerns include volatility, consumers losing their money, and the potential for fraud. So crypto companies are spending heavily on both the US congressional and presidential elections.
In 2024, crypto corporations have spent over $119 million to influence the US federal elections. These corporations, largely Coinbase and Ripple, are giving primarily to a super PAC, a political action committee called Fair Shake. The corporations are using Fair Shake to help elect pro-crypto candidates and attack crypto critics. This is regardless of political affiliation. And now with this spending, these corporations are attempting to discipline the US Congress to give in to their demands for less oversight and to weaken protections for investors.
One man who's unequivocally backing the crypto community is the Republican candidate, Donald Trump. He was a star attraction at July's Bitcoin conference and has even pledged to create a strategic national Bitcoin stockpile, similar to the US government's reserves of gold.
This afternoon, I'm laying out my plan to ensure that the United States will be the crypto capital of the planet and the Bitcoin superpower of the world, and we'll get it done. If crypto is going to define the future, I want to be mined, minted, and made in the USA it's going to be. It's not going to be made anywhere else. And if Bitcoin is going to the moon, as we say, it's going to the moon, I want America to be the nation that leads the way. And that's what's going to happen.
As for the Democrats, the party leader in the Senate has said he wants sensible crypto laws passed by the end of this year, while their presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, hasn't been particularly forthcoming on crypto. Last month, one of her advisors said she's going to support policies that ensure that emerging technologies and that sort of industry can continue to grow. And because American law enforcement often has global influence, the direction the industry takes as a result of November's election is likely to have global consequences. US-based Coinbase is one of the world's biggest platforms for buying and selling cryptocurrencies, and I've been catching up with its chief legal officer. Paul Greywall, thank you for talking business with us today. It's pretty clear the two candidates in November's US presidential election have very different positions on cryptocurrencies. So how important do you think that election is to the future of crypto, not just in the US, but of course by extension around the world as well?
There's certainly no question that crypto will be important in the US election come November. Every vote's going to count, and crypto votes are no exception. Mr. Trump has more explicitly adopted pro-crypto planks in his personal platform. Vice President Harris has had less of an opportunity to do so, given she too has reached out to the crypto industry and sought to better understand the concerns of the industry and ways in which we might break from the much more hostile, much more enforcement-focused approach of the current administration. And I can't underscore enough how important this is, not just for the US, but for the world, because of course, not only is the US an important market for crypto, but so much of the important technology surrounding it has been developed here. And I think it's also critically important we not lose sight of the fact that the rest of the world is not simply waiting for the US to get its act together. All over the world, we're seeing similar efforts to adopt standards that put, I think, a lot of competitive pressure on the United States not to be left behind.
Well, Donald Trump has already professed he's a big backer of crypto, and Kamala Harris's campaign has spoken to leaders of your industry. And of course, that does signal there could be some openness there that hasn't been there during the Biden administration. Have you any insights to share as to what was discussed between the campaign and the industry's leaders?
Well, I do in large part because I've been privileged to be a part of a number of those conversations. And what the Harris campaign has told many of us in the industry is that it recognizes that innovation is going to be critical for continued growth in the American economy, more jobs for more Americans. And so it understands that crypto and digital assets are an important part of that innovation narrative and innovation strategy.
Well, the crypto industry has collectively donated more than $119 million towards campaigns for this year's US elections, both congressional and presidential. Your company, Coinbase, is the biggest single donor, more than $50 million, with your boss saying money moves the needle when it comes to regulation. So what exactly are you hoping to achieve with these donations?
Elections here in the United States, particularly for our president and across the federal government, are quite expensive. It's an unfortunate reality of our politics. Coinbase, for its part, has recognized that in order for it to be a part of the broader political conversation and to engage with that process, needs to be involved. The campaigns for Mr. Trump and for Vice President Harris need to understand that their voters want to see crypto in their financial future. And that's the reason why we have engaged in ways that we think are very consistent with something that Coinbase has called for all along, which is sensible rules, sensible regulation. This is not a company, this is not an industry that is shying away from regulation.
Well, a bill to bring in new US laws isn't on the statute books yet, but the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, has already criticised it, saying it will give less protection to consumers, pointing out it will allow the industry to self-certify some products away from their jurisdiction. Is self-certification really a good idea? Can that really happen if consumers are to be protected?
Well, self-certification subject to explicit standards set by the Congress and by the regulators, and of course, oversight by those regulators and supervision by those regulators can and often does work. What we're fundamentally asking for, Tig, is the same approach, the same standards be applied to crypto as for any other asset class. no tougher, but no weaker. And in the case of digital assets here in the U.S., clarity about whether the asset should be treated as a commodity, for example, or as a security is critical, given our unique division of jurisdiction under our federal securities laws and commodities laws.
Well, take a step back, Paul, and just remind our audience, why does the world need crypto?
What these types of assets provide is a faster, cheaper, more secure way for value to be transmitted between two people, two entities, or two organizations anywhere in the world. Not enough people have access to basic financial services when it comes to the traditional system. What crypto can offer is the ability to get a home loan, the ability to send money back home to family and friends when working in another country. These are real examples and real use cases that crypto can provide if only given the chance.
Well, the US regulator, the SEC, is suing your company, accusing you of illegally operating an unregistered securities exchange, and plenty of other similar companies are facing similar actions. Do you feel like the regulator and its chair, Gary Gensler, are simply opposed to crypto, that they have a bias against it?
Well, there's no question that Mr. Gensler and the current SEC have adopted a view that that courtroom litigation is far preferable to legislation when it comes to establishing standards and rules. And so we think the right answer is, again, let's adopt rules. Let's have Congress reestablish its primacy, as our Constitution requires, in setting the standards for not just the regulators, but for all of us engaged in these activities. And through a much more collaborative process, get to rules that can work, as opposed to simply relying upon judges and American juries to decide these questions years after the events at issue have taken place.
Paul Greywall, Chief Legal Officer of Coinbase, thank you for speaking to us.
My pleasure, Ty. Thank you.
So just what is driving the US government's crackdown on cryptocurrencies, and what is the best way to protect consumers from the risks of what is still an emerging technology? I've been speaking to the head of the US regulator, whose job that is to do, and to make sure that financial markets are fair and efficient, the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Chair Gary Gensler, it's wonderful to have you on Talking Business today. Over the last few years, under your leadership, the number of enforcement actions that the SEC has taken on crypto firms has increased pretty substantially. Why are you paying so much attention to this industry?
First, thank you for having me on your program, Tig. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission is about protecting investors and ensuring that those who want to raise money have access to capital markets. You ask about crypto, and this is a form, in some regards, where people are trying to raise money, and thus they need to comply with U.S. securities laws if they're offering or selling those crypto security tokens here in the U.S. That's why we're paying attention to it.
Well, you're involved in court cases around crypto about what is and what isn't allowed. There are many in the industry who would like you to just come out and issue some clear rules, or maybe to urge Congress to pass some specific laws for what is still an emerging technology. Are you doing enough to provide that clarity?
The clarity exists. They're called the U.S. securities laws, and they've been time tested for 90 years. This is a field that has come along, and just because they're recording their crypto assets on a new accounting ledger, they say, we don't think we want to comply with the time tested laws. And what has it led to? It's led to a field that's rife with fraud and hucksters and grifters, and the investing public around the globe has lost too much money due to this non-compliance with time-tested protections for investors.
Those are some pretty strong words, hucksters, grifters. I'm sure you...
Well, they're accurate. Ty, I choose them carefully. Look, we've seen this show before in the U.S. It was in the 1920s. It led to a great stock market crash. It led to reforms put in place by our great president, President Franklin Roosevelt, in the 1930s to protect investors. It's a basic idea. If you want to raise money from the public, you need to share certain information with the public, and the public then gets to decide.
Congress is in the process of legislating for crypto regulation. It's not become law yet. But you at the SEC have already responded. And it was interesting, you've mentioned it already, citing the Great Depression with its bread lines and the shanty towns that it brought about back in the 1920s as what can happen when capital markets aren't properly regulated. Is that what you think we need to be worried about? A crypto crash causing something like the Great Depression?
We in America are blessed with the deepest, most liquid capital markets. We're only about 2 or 3% of the world's population, maybe 4%, but we're 40% of the world's capital markets. We're the capital market of choice, of destination, nearly $120 trillion in size in aggregate. We don't want to lose the confidence in that capital markets. Crypto is just a small piece of the US and worldwide capital markets, but it can undermine trust that everyday investors have in the capital markets in the United Kingdom, in all the countries where your listeners are, and in the US.
Do you feel some responsibility to protect the rest of the world from the worst effects of crypto as well?
Many firms around the globe and many investors around the globe put their faith and their trust in this market. And I do think about that on a daily basis. Our clients are 330 million Americans investing in these markets, but it's also bringing, we're kind of the capital markets of choice, a destination of choice that people rely upon.
There are, though, crypto advocates who warn the US is at risk of missing out on this revolution. What do you say to that?
Well, I say that the best way for technologies to thrive that want to access the U.S. capital markets is to do so within these time-tested rules. You wouldn't want to put a new car on a road and say, no speed limit. There's a reason that we have basic rules on the highways, and there's reasons we have basic rules of finance.
One other area that we've seen your agency put a lot of effort into is climate change and how companies disclose to investors the risks they face from things like greenhouse gas emissions, weather, and that transition to a low carbon economy. Now, those rules are currently on hold because of legal challenges. What are your fears if they don't come into force?
We're not a climate regulator or environmental regulator, but what we have found is that investors are finding very important to their investment decisions the climate risk disclosures that companies are already making. Well over half of the top 1,000 companies in the U.S. markets are already making disclosures around climate risk. So we put forward a rule to bring some consistency with regard to that. That's the real benefit, consistent decision, useful information.
Let's talk about another big issue of the moment, artificial intelligence, a technology that's drawing obviously a lot of excitement from investors, NVIDIA, Microsoft, some of the big names involved. More than 40% of the companies in the S&P 500 have now talked about it in their annual reports that they submit to the SEC. But I know you're worried about some of the claims these companies are making. Why?
As it comes to artificial intelligence, it may well be one of the most transformative technologies of our times, but it's still important that the companies raising money have a basis for their claims. One shouldn't sort of, as we call it, AI wash. In a similar way, one shouldn't greenwash, where the statements are not backed up by the data, they're not backed up by the actual business plans of a company.
How big of a problem do you think it is?
We've seen a number of instances in it from either investment advisors, and we've seen it from some public companies. There's an old saying, it's like, say what you do and do what you say. That's what the investing public expects and hopes for.
One other big change you've made recently is that when people buy and sell shares and other assets in the US, that those deals get settled more quickly, that they get their money more quickly. Why was that a priority for you?
It's really just about investors. Think of it this way. If you sell your stock on a Monday in the United Kingdom, when do you get your cash? It's Wednesday, 48 hours later. Or in Europe, It's, again, Wednesday, 48 hours later. It was the same way in the US. And we thought it would be appropriate to shorten that in 2024 to make sure that people actually got their money in one day. And it also lowers risk in the system. And I'm really talking about the big brokers and the banks that are buying and selling stocks, because one of those banks or one of those brokers could fail during that period of time. So it does also lower risk when you shorten something in what I'll call the market plumbing.
Gary Gensler, Chair of the US Securities and Exchange Commission, thank you for joining us on Talking Business.
Thank you, Ty.
Well, running any business can be fraught with challenges, even more so when the head of the World Health Organization has urged governments to take strict measures to prevent anyone taking up your product. I'm talking about electric cigarettes, or vapes. Their backers say they offer a less harmful alternative to the world's 1.3 billion smokers, but their critics, including the WHO, say they're highly addictive and still generate cancer-causing toxic substances, which are bad for the heart, lungs and brain. So how do you navigate those challenges while still making money? I've been speaking to the boss of the American vaping firm, Juul. Casey Crosthwaite, thank you so much for joining us today on Talking Business. Vaping is portrayed by your industry, by your company, as safer than cigarettes, but there are many who still say it's pretty harmful. The US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention say it contains highly addictive nicotine and other cancer-causing chemicals. So are you happy to sit here today and say it is safe?
Juul Labs was founded to address the leading cause of preventable death, and that is the use of combustion cigarettes. The company has been in existence now for over 10 years and focused on creating technology that will help the world deal with this public health crisis. And there has been a growing body of scientific evidence that for adult smokers that will completely switch off of using combustion, and unfortunately, as we sit here today, there's still 1 billion of them, that they in fact can have reduced risk by using e-vapor products versus combustion.
But it's not just cigarette smokers or former cigarette smokers who use Juul and other vaping products. Plenty of young adults out there are taking it up as a habit. Are you happy to see that?
We do not want any youth using our product. Nicotine itself is not safe. It is addictive. We do not want anyone other than adult smokers who otherwise would not quit to use the Juul system.
So should more be done to prevent new users engaging with vaping? One idea is that vapes should only be available on prescription. Perhaps, is that something you'd support?
I think regulation and scrutiny and evaluation of how best to offer products like e-vapor and Juul in particular to adult smokers is critical. However, I think it's a balance. When cigarettes are offered on every shelf, ideally you would want adult smokers to have access to products like Juul with accurate information to understand their choices they're making. So in some market, if you can only access a product like e-vapor through a prescription or some other way that is more difficult to get to, then I think that balance is off.
The World Health Organization has identified 34 countries that don't allow vaping. Some have decided to ban it, some have never legislated to allow it. Do you think that number is likely to rise or fall?
I certainly hope it falls. I think when you have countries in the world where you can walk into a store and buy a cigarette, a product that is deadly, that kills half its users prematurely, but for whatever reason, a regulator has determined that you cannot offer an alternative to that adult smoker that could potentially provide less harm, I don't think that's the right outcome. I do believe that with the right regulatory framework, with responsible manufacturing and product technology, and science and relative risk information that's accurate and accessible to smokers, I think we could be on a journey, maybe in my lifetime, where we start to see a world with cigarettes on the way out the door finally. So I think it's getting that balance right.
The head of the World Health Organization spoke about e-cigarettes last year, saying, "I urge countries to implement strict measures to prevent uptake, to protect their citizens, especially their children and young people." So if countries do live up to that, does that mean that as a business, vaping is not really viable as a long-term investment?
I look at today where we stand, and we have converted 2 million adult smokers who otherwise would not have less cigarettes to Juul. And with 1 billion adult smokers that are out there, I believe this business has a very long runway and a very important task ahead of it. We have been investing heavily in next generation technology, next generation access prevention technology with things like pod identification chips to lock single use of the product. And today we exist in essentially 3 markets. So I think our business will have plenty to do as we go pursue this important work of converting the world's 1 billion adult smokers.
Casey Crosswaite, thank you so much for talking business with us today.
Thank you so much. It was great being with you.
Well, that's it for this week. Don't forget, though, you can keep up with all the latest on the global economy on the BBC News website and the smartphone app. And don't forget, you can get in touch with me and the rest of the BBC Business team on social media. I'm at Tig Enright. Until next time, bye-bye.